Very nice. Hello, welcome once again to Suffolk Folkways, a program that celebrates Suffolk County's cultural heritage. My name is John Ailitson, and my guest today is Ed Keaney, obviously an Irish fiddler. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here, John. Nice
what was that
here.
you were playing?
That was just a little hornpipe I wrote. Many times you used to ask me, did I write any music? I did write some music in my time, and I wrote some songs. But like that, those days are behind me, and I just could not dig them up anymore. And just last night, I thought to myself, well, John will ask me again if I ever wrote any music. So I just sat down, I wrote this little hornpipe last night, and I called it the Snugborough Hornpipe.
Why that? Why did you call it that?
Well, it's the Snugborough, happens to be the townland I came from. I come from a little townland which was separated. One half of it was called Glendone, the other half was called Glencoe. Glendone meant deep glen, Glencoe meant the glen of the cuckoo. But the two together were called Snugborough. And I called this the Snugborough Hornpipe.
Very pretty. Now, this was in County Donegal?
County Donegal. Ardara, County Donegal.
Okay. What was it like growing up there?
Well, I grew up there. I was the last of 6 children, and I was 14 years after my sister was born, and I grew up just like a little boy, like if there was nobody else in the family like myself, because they were all grown up. And I was the only child around the town, and I was treated pretty good as a boy would be treated in Ireland at that time. We didn't have too much. Money was scarce and clothes were scarce, and we went to the local little school, which was about 35 to 40 people in the school, had a teacher and a schoolmaster, and we learned a little Gaelic, not too much, about a half hour a day. The rest was all English. My parents all spoke English where I came from.
But some of your neighbors spoke Gaelic.
And some of my neighbors spoke Gaelic because they never left home. My father left home a couple of times. He went to America twice. And my mother came from a town called Killybegs. And I doubt if they ever spoke Gaelic in Killybegs, because that was a seaport town with people from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and wherever lived in that town. And I don't think they hardly ever spoke any Gaelic around Killybegs, except in the schools, maybe. But that's why I didn't have too much Gaelic, and only what I picked up at school.
Yeah. You were pretty close to your brother, though. He was quite a bit older than you?
My brother was about 20 years older than I was, and he was very good to me. He acted like a father to me, you know. He was a young father. My father was an old father. He was like a young father, and he was a sort of a outgoing person, because he worked both on the farm, which we had a farm, about a 50-acre farm, 3 or 4 cows and 7 or 8 cattle, and about 40, 50 sheep and dog and pony and donkey and all that went with it, sheep, chickens and ducks. But he worked also, like my father did, part-time. They had to work part-time at something to get money, you know. Money was a scarce thing. And he worked as a water bailiff, or like that was a protector of fish.
Sort of like a warden.
A warden. And he also worked spawning the fish in trays and everything in the summertime. The melts and the pays, and did all that type of stuff.
Okay,
with
so these were sort of fish farming.
Fish farming. There was one little place that was set up in Glantis, about 6 miles from where I lived. But they did that. But what I mean is, he was in the towns a lot. And he loved music. And he didn't have that creative ear for music, but he learned by being in the towns and talking to people who played pianos and stuff. He learned to read music. And he was very interested in it. He used to play the accordion, the Irish, what we call the melodeon.
Okay.
The melodeon, some call it melodian, some call it melodeon, and some call it the tenement tormentor.
The tormentor?
The tenement tormentor. So anyway, he played that, and he learned quite a bit about music on his own from this person and that person, and he taught me how to read music.
Why did he take the time to teach you?
because he knew that I had a fairly good ear for music. I don't have a great ear for music, but I had a better ear than he had, and I had as good an ear as the ordinary individual would have, you know. Nothing spectacular, but fairly good. Could pick up tunes much faster than maybe some people could.
Do you remember the first tune he ever taught you?
Yeah, I remember him teaching me the first tune and how I learned it on an old tin fiddle that he bought for me for 2 shillings.
A tin fiddle.
A tin fiddle, and it was made by the Tinkers in Ireland that time.
Who were the Tinkers?
The Tinkers in Ireland were the people that made the tins. And
pots and pans, things
pots
like
and pans and sharpened tools, and went from house to house selling them. And they also were a type of people that never... they didn't settle down too much in any one place. They moved around from place to place.
Now, they move around in big wagons with horses and things?
They moved around in wagons. Some of them had big wagons, and some of them just had donkeys and a couple of ponies. And they sort of were families that sort of stuck together, some of them. Maybe 3 or 4 guys would come to your house, and 2 or 3 women and 2 or 3 kids and 2 or 3 horses and a couple of donkeys, and you were all by yourself. You know, let's face it. And this invasion of your privacy occurred. But you were expecting these things did happen. And you weren't too much afraid of them. They never did you too much harm or anything, you know, but you were always scared because you were alone. And there was a lot of them, and they were very demanding because they were outgoing people. They were people that was always meeting people, and they lived by what they could get from everybody else.
So they would ask the farmers for different provisions, right?
Yeah, they would ask for provisions because you had plenty of potatoes there, plenty of turnips here, carrots over there, and cabbage down there. So they had their bags ready there. They just walked in with their bags, and they filled them up themselves, or they give them to you to fill up.
Now, they justified that kind of lifestyle in a certain way.
It was a type of, it was an understanding. It wasn't a written understanding, but it was a mutual kind of an understanding that was understood. You knew that they went to the other people up the road too. They did the same thing. They didn't demand too much. They didn't make you give them a lot, but they made you give them something.
But they also thought it was their right.
Thought it was the right. Now there were some of the teachers those tinkers that you knew individually. There were local tinkers that were within range of where you lived, and you knew them. And some of them were good musicians.
So you were happy to see some of them.
They played bagpipes and flutes and fiddles. And when they came, especially to our house, my father loved music and my brother loved music, and they knew that I liked music. They would ask him, "Do you want to stay for the night around? Put up your ponies down in the field down there, and put your tent there, and a couple of you can sleep in the barn, you know." And then they'll bring in their bagpipes and play for you. We used to like to see them nearly coming, especially the ones that played the music. But then there was another type that weren't really tinkers. They were a sort of a mixture of gypsy tinkers. And they would scare you sometimes when they came. They came up from the west of Ireland and places like that, and they went from fair to fair selling old horses and stuff. But I just would like to cut it out there because I have not much to say for some of those people.
Okay, but just one final thing. You mentioned that some of the Tinkers felt that they were descendants of the old bards to the kings.
Oh yeah, true. They were years ago. They had there was a lot of castles in Ireland, and a lot of kings and a lot of princes way back in the years of, as tradition goes. There's no really too much writings on them except folklore, as far as I know. And there are a lot of books written on it by this person and that person, but it's only something that they heard from somebody else, as far as I know. But there was a lot of kings, and the castles are still there to prove it. And they must have lived a very fine life, these people that was pretty well off in Ireland, the kings and princes years ago, because they could afford to have their own bards play for them. Especially harps. They played the harp. The harp was a very popular instrument. Seemingly it was one of the first instruments ever introduced in Ireland because it seems to be one of the oldest.
Oh, really?
That's what I would think it must be. The harp was a very old instrument, even, you know, O'Carlin, and then they have Brian Brew's harp there. I saw it myself in Dublin, in the museum, and he died in 1014. Yeah. And there was no fiddles made then. There was no fiddles made any time up till after the 16th century of any popularity.
Well, when you were growing up, what were the traditional instruments that
The
people
fiddle
played?
got very popular in Ireland. There was wherever the fiddles came from in Ireland, the place got swarmed with fiddles. A
What
lot
other,
of it, they were of a cheap make. You know, they were factory produced wherever they came from, and some of them were fairly good. You know, not too bad at all. And the older they get, the better they get.
what other instruments were there?
They had the accordion. It was a German instrument, mostly a Hohner made in Germany, and they used to make these Hohner accordions to play the Irish music. They used to make them so they would be in the key that fitted the Irish music, so they could play them with the fiddles.
I see.
A lot of them was made. They were set keys, maybe one row of key in the key of D major or G major. Mostly those were the two keys the accordions were on, so you could play the Irish jigs and reels on them with a fiddle player without too much effort.
What other instruments were traditional at that time when you were growing up?
Banjo was fairly traditional. Banjo was used a lot in the first bands, anyhow, that I knew.
Was that the tenor banjo, the
Like
four-string?
like the four-string tenor banjo. That was beginning to be used quite a bit, especially in the little dance bands around banjo, and there was some people used to bring home from Europe or from America, maybe a mandolin or something like that.
Okay.
But the fiddle was the most important instrument over there.
What about the Irish pipes, the Uilleann pipes? Was that?
Well, the Uilleann pipes, believe it or not, I only knew one man in Donegal that could play the Uilleann pipes. There's a man named John Diver, and he brought them from America with him.
Oh, really?
He was in America once or twice, and he was a fine fiddle player. He brought two lovely violins home, but I think he brought the Uilleann pipes home from America because there was nobody else that had a set of pipes, and he used to play in the Irish Keeley bands, real traditional music.
Now, what's a Cayley band for those?
A Keeley band consists of maybe one or two fiddlers, and maybe a melodeon player, a little set of drums, and a piano player, and a flute player. So the flute player would be the Uilleann pipe player. Maybe he could double on them, you know, depend on. But he was the only Uilleann pipe player I knew. So they always would try to have a flute player. It was very, very important to have a flute player sort of in the Keeley bands.
Okay. What about a penny whistle? Was that very common?
It was not used in the Keeley bands hardly at all. Very little used in Keeley bands. The penny whistle. The penny whistle came in more or less with the sing-song type of days. After nearly my time in Ireland, the penny whistle was never popular in Ireland. Although there was ones here and one there, and people played the penny whistle, but it wasn't brought out in the public that much.
Ah, all right.
And later on in years, they brought it out as an instrument, and they seemed to work harder on it and became better at it, and played it at fèises and everything like that.
All right, maybe we can backtrack a little bit. You mentioned that the Tinkers made your first fiddle.
Yeah, they made the first.
What did that look like? Do you remember the day you got it?
I remember well that first fiddle. It was brought home to me, and I was only a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old at the time, maybe around that. And they brought that. My brother met this gentleman. I call him a gentleman. I guess he was a gentleman in the town, and he sold him this fiddle for 2 shillings. That'd be just like 2 quarters, you know, because his sister came from America and she brought him home a nice violin from America. So Sonny bought this tin fiddle from him, and it was a godsend. It was made exactly like this fiddle, but it did not have, and it was all made of tin.
Of tin.
Of tin, and they even had a rise. You know, the curve was made in it, banged out on the back and banged out in the front. It had the F's in it, you know, and so on. I call them S's. But anyway, but this had to be wood, this part here. And they had to attach this onto tin. So naturally, it wasn't easy to make it too stable, you know. It wasn't the stability was poor, so it could not be tuned up to concert pitch, such as this violin is now, or fiddle, whatever you want to call it. It had to be tuned lower with not as much stress on the strings, and that diminished the tone. Actually, it made it much lower, softer.
But you could play and
But you
learn.
did have the all the notes on it, you
Mhm.
know, and you did hear the tunes come out. Now it wasn't proper. You wouldn't hear it when other good fiddles would be playing because it'd be very low, you know.
Uh-huh.
But still, and all, it was a good thing to learn on. It was made, and they had it painted. I think if they didn't paint it, it would have sounded much better. They had a big coat of paint of some kind of paint, made it red looking, you know,
Oh,
yellow looking. Oh God, yes, I remember well. But anyway, that was my first fiddle, a tin fiddle.
Can you play a couple of tunes for us? Some of the tunes that you would have learned back when you were
Yeah,
a youngster?
when in Ireland, my brother and us, we played, and the people, we went from house to house and learned the tunes from the other musicians that was older and heard these tunes off over and over again. So they used to do the stack of barley and Highland fling as the dances, and like a stack of barley was one of the famous tunes to do, you know, for two people to dance. And in this country, when the Irish parties gets together, they say, "Oh, play a stack of barley," because everybody knows a stack of barley. So it went like this. It's a sort of a hornpipe. It is a hornpipe. Now that was a stack of barley where they
That's
danced up and down the floor.
hmm
And then they had the Highland fling, like some say it's the Devil's Dead, they called some of the, they had great names for some of these tunes, but they were all Donegal names. They came from a way back. Some say it's the Devil's Dead, and some say it's Harley, some say it's the Devil Dead and buried in Killarney. I don't know whether I would want to bury the devil in Killarney, but anyhow, I'm just going way back as far as I can. That was called the
That's
Highland
pretty.
Fling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was hundreds of those Highland Flings that we used to play, you know. Yeah, and everyone had his own set, you know, and then you'd learn what the other fellow had, and he
And
would.
people were generous. They, when you traveled around with your brother, they were willing to
They were
share.
willing to share. Some once in a while, you would meet somebody that would like to keep something to himself. Now and again,
Yeah.
you know, he had something that he figured was of great importance. It maybe wasn't of very little importance, but once in a while, he would not like to share. But most of the men did share, really did. They were, and they enjoyed to share. Even in this country, they're the same way that people love to share. When I practice with them now, but. That's a horse of a different colour. But anyway, they did share. They did
Okay.
share their music, and it was nice because you would go from house to house. I mean, once a week, my brother would take me this house, that house, and he wanted to hear these people playing. Sometimes the guys were so good, you know, I knew I could never play that way they played, and it just disheartened me, and I didn't want to practice anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when you would hear these good fiddle players and people play, you didn't want to play it again because I could never play that good again, you know.
Were these parties, or were they playing just for you and your brother?
No, there were not There were no these type of places. There were no parties. They were just. They were called them in this country. They would call them sessions, sessions or sessions.
Sessions. Yeah.
Sessions, and they would just go in. And Paddy brought his fiddle, and Joe brought his accordion, and then somebody might bring an old gramophone. They called them gramophones at the time,
Yeah.
with a couple of records. And played some of the tunes that some of the people that are already famous were playing. And would he hear how this fella played this tune? We would be playing Miss McLeod's Reel. And we would put on Miss McLeod's Reel. It was played by Coleman out here in New York. And he played it in a different way. Do you want me to just show you what they used to do? We'd play Miss McLeod's Reel in our own nice, easy way, and then I'll change it into his way.
Okay.
Miss McLeod's Reel, I think that's one of the oldest reels in Ireland. I mean, there's one of them anyhow. So we used to hear the people play like that, or close to that way of playing. Anyhow, that's only an imitation of these guys, how they used to do it. But that gives you the two ways.
Yeah.
Nice, simple way of playing it, and then the different variations.
Yeah, a lot fancier.
Fancier, that's what I said. It didn't spoil the tune, and they weren't showing off, they were just expressing themselves.
Was it possible, though, for a fiddler to get too showy, to ruin a tune by showing off too
yes,
much?
it could indeed. If he was too showy, he would spoil the tune.
Yeah.
And you cannot do that unless you're just you're doing something by yourself. You know what I mean? Nobody else can sit down and play that same tune with you.
Right.
You only have to do that when you're just performing. But like you say, you can overdo it.
Yeah.
And it's better not to overdo it.
As you got to go around and meet these people, your neighbors, some close and some a little further away, I guess, what was their attitude towards you? Did they like to see another young person
They
learning?
did. There were some really that did. The people that were good musicians, for some reason, they liked to see you learning.
Yeah.
For some reason, because they used to take me aside and talk to me and tell me, you should go and go to somebody and try to learn better, And I thought they were almost criticizing me, but they weren't. They were giving me advice. They were saying, you could be good at this if you would try.
Yeah.
And I could. It's now I know they were really good friends. The more I think about them, the way they were very good friends. But there were some, like you said before, that would like to hide things from you, and they didn't like to hear of maybe once in a while. Maybe somebody wouldn't like to hear of some young fella that's getting very good, or he's doing well on the fiddle or something. And they might have a little bit of something against you for it.
Now, did you just play, when you were playing for yourself, did you just play at home with your brother, or did you start going other places besides the neighbors' houses?
Well, that was, when I was very young, I only just played in the neighbors' houses or with my brother. And once a year, they had a dance in our school. It was called a ball. They called it a ball. I asked one time, why did they call it a ball? They said it was because everybody went round and round, and round and round and round and up one side and round. So that's why they called it a ball. And there was a ball in the school. So that most likely that's where they got the name ball from. I don't think it was from that thing in the ceiling, because there was no ball in the ceiling.
No chandelier in the ceiling.
There was no chandelier in the ceiling in those days. There was just a lamp, an oil lamp hanging on the sides of the wall, 2 or 3 of them. But they would have a couple of musicians play at these dances in the schools. And that was just to raise a little money to buy fuel for the fire, for the school, because the school was independent. It didn't have any farm, or the schoolmaster couldn't go out and cut the turf, so they had to buy the turf from some neighbour man that would sell them. So you had to have a few pounds, and That was done by the town, the canon, the canon in the town, the canon, the head of the church was took care of that part of the school. Make sure there was the fire in the schools and all that type of thing. So that's something all in its own. But that's where the money came from. But they used to get a couple of musicians to play, and my brother was one of those that they used to get to play. And he used to have a friend of his play with him himself, and this friend, and there would only be two. So I wasn't big enough to play, but when I was big enough to play and I learned enough tunes to help to play the sets and all that type of thing, they put me in the band too. And I was playing up there on that little stage. You know what? The stage was made with two bench
horses?
No, where the people when you sit down, and write on, you know.
Oh, desks.
Two desks.
Yeah.
But the desks in our school were long desks. They were 7 or 8 feet long, you know. And there was two put up, one beside the other, and two chairs put up on the top of that, and that was the stage.
That was the stage.
Yeah, I'm telling you, you got up on that stage, you were getting places. Oh God, yes. So we played them. We played.
How old were you when you first started doing
most
that?
likely, I got into that thing when I would be maybe I was about 10 years old.
That ruined you for life, right?
Yeah, I got out and I got a couple of shillings for playing too, for the first time in my whole life.
Yeah.
They gave us a couple of shillings for playing, and it was great to get a couple of shillings for playing music.
Now, did that just whet your appetite then? Did you want to perform for other people after that?
That whet my appetite a little bit for playing, because then there was other schools in the district, you know, one here, maybe 4 or 5 miles or 6 miles away, and they would have an affair. And if they liked the music that they heard down in this other place, they would ask you to play for them too. So maybe we used to get maybe 4 or 5, as I say, gigs.
Yeah, gigs. Right.
And in the winter
You didn't call it gigs, though,
no,
did you?
we didn't call it gigs that time. No way. There was another name that seemed that was added to my vocabulary as years went on. So we used to play there. We used to play at those places too. Then, as I went on, and dance bands started to learn to play in the towns.
Yeah. Now, when you were playing at the schools, at these school balls, what kind of music were you playing? We
were playing like staccabarlies, Highland flings, versivianas, and waltzes.
Okay, so it was pretty much traditional music.
Yeah, we're playing waltzes, and the waltzes were the Irish songs, you know, like, you know.
Can you show us one?
Yeah, I had.
Since you brought it up.
Waltzes, you know.
Oh, maybe just a part of
you
one.
know, like Believe Me and all those, and like, you know. It'll be played with more vigor, like with a, you know, I'm playing it now kind of like an air, but that would be played with more time to it, so people could dance round and round, you know. And with the set of quadrilles, that was all jigs. We played jigs for the sets. Just play one fast one, like Plansky Brown, an old jig they used to like to play from O'Carolan way back in the 17th century. that's an old tune. One of our cows.
But now, when you start playing in town, did the music style start changing?
Its music style started changing into different type of music, English and American music.
Ah,
And they still used there was only 2 violin players in all the neighborhood that could play that type of music. They learned it. They learned to read music in different keys, because the foreign music, as you would call it, was written in all different keys, in flats, E flat and B flat and F and all that type of stuff. And the traditional fiddle player could not play in those keys. It was just an impossibility.
yeah.
And it had to be done by somebody that had learned. So there was only 2 men in our part of the country that could play that type of music, and they played very little reels or jigs or any Irish music. They were sort of they sort of went into this thing as soon as they could, you know, and they learned it, and they studied it, and they were in the bands. And then naturally one guy heard the saxophone, so one guy went out and he says, "I'm going to get one of those things." And he started and he played the saxophone. So in the town would have a town band would consist of maybe 1 violin player, a saxophone player, a drummer, and a banjo player, like I said, a tenor banjo player, and piano, and that would be the band.
Yeah.
So one time I was lucky enough. I was hanging around. I was always around watching these people and listening to them, and wanted to learn their tunes and everything, you know. And I trying to learn their tunes. So the piano player, one of the piano players in the town, one time took me into her house. She was a lady, and she started to teach me about the different keys, you know, the different keys, and how this tune was in this key and that tune was in that key, and tried to get me to let my fingers slip down a little bit to get the flats in and stuff. So I caught on to a fairly, not great, but I was fit to do it. I was fit to play with the band. But the best job I got was drumming in the band. I got to be drummer.
Now, how'd that happen?
That happened to be, I was at a dance one night in one of the halls close by in our own town or the next town, and our band was playing at the band. So there was no drummer there. The drummer went out for a supper and he never came back. So I sneaked up and I sat down behind the drums and I started, you know, just a little bit. And the next thing, I was keeping time, and then the piano player looked around and smiled at me, and the fiddle player looked at me and smiled at me. "Hey, you're doing pretty good. You're almost as good as the guy that's here." So they said, "Stay, play away." Oh, I played on. So when the night was over, they said, "Would you play with us?" He never came back. He got drunk. He's not going to play anymore anyway. So I got playing the drums for a long time with them. I had a good time with them playing the drums. Yeah.
Now, you played another instrument as well, right?
Then I went and I said, I got to play more music than drums. So the piano accordion began to get kind of popular. And there was 1 or 2 of them in our county. So a couple of people had them. And when show crowds would come around, there'll be a guy playing a piano accordion in the show crowd. And it looked very nice on the stage. Piano accordion was a very decorative instrument. And it looked good. If you didn't play it well, it even made the band look good, you know, just to be there. So I went up to Dublin, this young fellow and myself, and he said, he says, I need a saxophone. He used to play Irish accordion. And he played it very well. He says, I'm going to get a saxophone. So both of us took off for Dublin one day. And we went up to Upper Camden Street, and wherever it was, we bought a second-hand saxophone and a second-hand accordion. Big accordion, and it was in pretty good shape. We brought them home. And boy, I'm telling you, I stayed with it day and night, trying to learn to play that thing. So within a couple of weeks, I was playing at a dance.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was really out, learned a few tunes, a few waltzes, and a couple of easy tunes, you know. And I was fit to join in with the band with it. So from there on, I worked on the accordion, and I played for years on the accordion over there, and I got into different bands. There was now like a band in Kellybeggs, there was a band in Duncanelly, there was a band in Glenties, there was a band in Ardara, there was a band in Donegal, and those 5 bands, I used to play with the 5 of them with the accordion. If there were special dances coming up, a guy would come up with his car and pick me up at the house and take me down. He says, there's 2 dances or there's 3 dances down here. for the next 3 nights and come down and play with us. And I used to make a good pound on it too.
Yeah,
it was
that-
good for me, yes. Along with that, we did the weaving, as most likely.
Yeah, we haven't really talked too much about some of the other things going on. I like
Enjoyed it, and I'm glad we did enjoy it.
these were the weaving was on the big floor looms too, right?
Yes, we had big looms. We had a loom in our house from before I was ever born. We had a loom from away World War One, because as you know, my brother was 20 years older than I, and he learned to weave when he was a young boy in World War One. When the weaving was when there was a big demand for Irish homespun. The Irish homespun was the sheep with the wool that they clipped from their own sheep on the hills.
I see.
Took it home, washed it and cleaned it, oiled it with different types of oil, sometimes used old butter and everything. And they made their homespun pure white weft, which was the long going into the loom, and then they dyed the wool for the weft, warp that went into the loom, and the weft went across the loom. So they dyed that with crottle, and that crottle, they had it was a special process. Wherever whoever started it, it was a great thing. They dyed those all colors from that crottle, from a dark brown to a nice light brown to a nice yellow. The more crottle you put in, the darker it was, or maybe the more it was boiled.
What was crottle?
Crottle was a scales that's brought off the rocks, that's on rocks. It's like a weather scale. It's almost like what you see on the south side of the trees in the forests, you know?
Yeah.
And the same thing is on the rocks, but it's a crottle that comes on the rocks, and it grows in the same process as that. You scrape it off, it's just loose. It goes into nearly sand after you scrape it off.
Yeah.
And like a shell nearly, you know, a soft shell. So that's what you had to know the good stuff too, which was good and which was not good.
So that weaving sort of died down after World War One and then picked up again?
After World War One, during the World War One, now everyone had a lot of people went into the weaving, and it was a big deal. And they got good looms that was made, I think, by an English company called Handel, and they were very far advanced compared to the real old-fashioned hand looms that they had a generation before that. And they were very good looms.
Yeah.
And we had one laying there, and I was wondering what it was for, because it was up there and wasn't never used, and it was up in the big room in the barn, and I never was used. And they were telling me it was a loom. My mother's spinning wheel was there, and as I told you before, she got kind of sick early in her years, and she didn't do any spinning. But my next door neighbor, she spun always. They would make a couple of blankets every year from their own sheep. So I saw how the wool was done, and I used to work with her and help to card the wool. And even she'd make me sit down and teach me how to make the thread fine and thick and how to match it perfect the right way and everything. I was good at it. I could do it. That was spinning. So then that came to a complete standstill after the war. People had even webs in the houses, they couldn't sell them. They were sitting there for years and years, and then until the other war broke out, World War II. And for some reason there came a demand from homespun again, from the European countries and maybe from America too, I don't know. But the people started to make homespun again, and there was a lot of weaving to be done of all kinds. We were weaving shirting for the army, nice fine shirting, and it was good. We could make a good week's pay.
Yeah.
We worked long hours at it, but it was at home. We had our own looms at home. My brother went out and got another loom for me when the weaving got plenty and full and there was a demand for a weaver. And he helped me to erect my loom up beside his loom in this barn that we extended and made bigger, straight onto the back of the house. So you only had to walk out of the house around the corner and sit on your loom and go to weave all day. And that was good. That was good for us. That was a good industry, a good cottage industry. You'll call it cottage industry, I guess.
Yeah.
It was very good.
Now, there were other parts. We can't cover everything in this short time, I'm afraid.
No.
But there was something that you once mentioned before we talked briefly about how you got to this country. I guess there weren't a whole lot of doctors around, and one of the things you told me about was sometimes when people got a sore or something on their ankle or their leg, they called it
the rose? Yeah, I was telling you about the rose. You know, there was a lot of diseases different diseases. So I remember that one especially because I remember if you got the rose, it was a terrible disease. You couldn't. It was a type of a sore that would not heal.
Like an ulcer almost.
Like an ulcer, and you could not heal it. And the people knew it to look at it. You didn't even have to go to a doctor. But if you could get a certain family whose names were McCahill.
McCahill.
They had to be McCahill. They had to be McCahill, and I think their wife. I think you had to be married to a McCahill to have, or else your I think that's what it was. I think if you were a McCahill and you were McCahill before you were married, like the woman, and then McCahill, you were McCahill. I think that's how it was. I will not swear to that, but it was something like that. Then these children had the cure of the rose.
And what was that cure?
And that cure, they had to take blood from them. They had to take their own blood and mix it with a sort of a process that they never told you what it was. Could have been flour, could have been meal, could have been anything. But that really cured the rose. No doctor could cure it.
And they would what? Take that mixture and put on a poultice and put on the sore?
Of it and put it on on the rose, and it cured it. And I saw different religious people using the same thing. Protestants taking it from the Catholics and putting it on them and getting well. I saw it with my own eyes. Yes.
Were there a lot of, well, we could go on.
You could go.
But just one quick question, then we'll get how you got here. Were there a lot of old stories about the old days when you were growing up? Did people talk about the old Irish history, or they talk about leprechauns that, people in America always talk about?
Everybody talked about leprechauns. There were supposed to be leprechauns everywhere, Men used to tell stories that their fathers went out. When I used to meet some old men, I would ask them, do you really believe that there's fairies? We call them fairies over there. Oh, sure, they would say, there's plenty of fairies. My father, saw them here, and my father saw them there. And my father went out one day, and he saw all these little lights, and he went over to see what was on it. So all those little fellas ran away, and they left their pipes. And do you know that he had the little clay pipes that were only about 1.5 inches long? Little clay pipes with little small holes, and they said they belonged to the fairies, and he carried them into his house with his cap. And he said they belonged to the fairies, these little clay pipes, they were only this size. And I never saw them, but they said they were there. But they used to tell all these stories, and lights were seen here, and you could not cut a holly bush in some places because that was a secret type of bush, especially down in the glens. One man cut this holly bush. He said he wanted it for something, and everybody said, don't cut that holly bush, you'll never have any luck. And he cut the holly bush. And his cow went down next day and jumped off the bank and broke her neck right beside where he cut the holly bush. So he didn't cut any more holly bushes. But that's the stories you hear about the fairies now.
One of my first exposures to storytelling was the grandmother of a friend of mine. She was from Ireland, I don't remember what county, and when we were 8 or 10 years old, she scared the daylights out of us with ghost stories and devil stories, and then she would tell us about 9 o'clock at night, all right, time to go home, and we'd have to run home by ourselves in the dark.
There was all kinds of ghosts. There was all kinds of ghost stories you would be trembling about them. They're too long to even go into.
I know. We'll have to do that for another show.
Some other time we'll go into some of the ghost stories. Yeah.
How did you get to this country?
Then I got to this country when I was about 26 years old, and I was still weaving, and there was still the homespun industry died down shortly after the war. But we were still weaving because we were weaving a type of a government grant that was to the Gaelta, that was sent to the Gaelta to help us out. So it continued and is still there. My brother became a manager in the mart that was in the little headquarters that was down there years after I left here. But we still wove. But it was a periodic kind of it wasn't steady, There would come 2 or 3 months good, and then you would have 3 or 4 months you wouldn't get any, and that depends on how they got their little grants and stuff. But then people were starting to go to America. Young people, fellas that I knew, fellas that were pretty well off, fellas that had little stores in the town and everything. And I said, how are you going to get to America? You can't get to America. It was closed down, immigration and all that type of stuff. So they said, if you get anybody in America that'll write out a visa, have it done.
To sponsor you?
To sponsor you, that you wouldn't be a war to the state or to the city. you could do it. So I wrote to my sister. I said I would like to give America a try for a year or two, see what it's like. Oh, she said, I'll get a visa and I'll send it to you. So I came out, and that's how I came out. I came out here, and I came out on the Queen Mary. I sailed from Southampton, and landed out here just a few days before Christmas in 1948.
Yeah.
And worked at different type of jobs. I worked as on horn and harness, short order cook.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I did all that type of stuff. Worked in the telephone company too, in the restaurant in the telephone company. And then I got called to go on the bus for the transit for the New York City omnibus.
And that was your career
and I
then?
broke in on the buses, and I stayed on the buses for almost 27 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. That was my main way of living.
Yeah. But while you were working for the Transit Authority, you were still playing music, weren't you?
That's when we really played a lot of music.
Yeah.
I brought that accordion out to this country with me. And not much else, just but the accordion. And we played it at a lot of places, and then I traded it in, and I got a better one, and then later on, I really got a much better one. And I used to play with the bands in this country, the Irish-American bands.
Yeah.
Joined the union very shortly after I came here because you couldn't play without joining the union.
Yeah, you couldn't perform.
The other fellows couldn't play with you. They weren't allowed to play with you. You would get them in trouble too,
Yeah.
you know. So I stayed in the union, and we played 2 and 3 nights a week.
What kind of music were you playing then? The old traditional stuff or something
playing
different?
mostly a sort of a half country, western, Irish, American tunes, you know.
Can you think of one?
No, well, it was mostly accordion I did all those
okay.
times. Piano, accordion music I did at those times. And I did accompany the singers mostly with the accordion. And I also played the hornpipes and reels on the accordion. I wasn't a real accomplished reel or accordion player on the accordion, but I could play the American music fairly well. What we called, I could fake it well.
Okay.
Yeah. So then we used to have our own dance bands and everything like that. So I used to have all type of nationalities play with me.
Yeah.
Jewish fellas, Italian fellas, Polish musicians, all kinds of musicians. We played at the Irish balls, as they call them in this country, the Irish dances for different counties. I was well in with the Irish counties because I used to go to meetings and everything. I used to be an officer in the Donegal Association, and then I got well in with the United Irish Counties, and I got to know this Paddy Walsh that lives out here in East Hampton.
Yeah.
And he was well in with the counties and played a lot of good balls, and used to have a nice band, and I used to be his accordion player too for him. He treated me very well.
Yeah.
That's how we did the Irish, that type of stuff.
What was happening with traditional Irish music at the time? Was that sort of fading away, or was it?
It was sort of more or less in the background. What happened was there was never any money to be made much on the Irish traditional music. It was only trophies and medals and praise and your good guy Tom.
And that's fine,
tune. Will you have another drink?
Yeah, right.
And this stuff, you know. And then they started making money on it as the Clancy brother people came out to this country.
And that was what, the mid-50s?
And they came out, started to make they opened up a kind of a new scene. And what they did, they opened up the real old Irish traditional songs and tunes.
Okay, well, we're getting the signal to wrap up here, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it was nice talking to you.
It was nice, and maybe after I thank all of you for joining us, you know, it's been a pleasure to meet Ed Keaney, and it's been a pleasure to hear a little bit about some of the traditions that you've been keeping alive. Maybe we could just finish up the show with you playing a few more tunes for us. And I'd like to thank all of you before we go for joining us. And remember, tradition is a part of all of our lives. We all have folklore in our lives, and it's just the stuff that we learn by word of mouth and by example. And Ed, this is some stuff that you've learned from other people and you're keeping alive.
Some tunes we learn from other people, like a reel, you know, Irish reels. We love the Irish reels.